Welcome everyone, and thanks for taking the time to review this webinar. My name's Tam and my role is to walk us through the content. But I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm presenting from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tk'emlúps Secwepemc people. And it's with gratitude and respect that I recognize their stewardship of the land. And as we gather in this virtual space, I invite each of you to reflect on the lands that you're joining from and the Indigenous peoples who've cared for those lands across generations. This presentation is designed to support caregivers in understanding ADHD through both Western psychological frameworks and provide a context for Indigenous perspectives. So over the next hour or so, we'll be looking at ways to better understand and support children and youth impacted by ADHD. And who we are, Indigenous Caregivers of BC. So our work is grounded in cultural safety, trauma-informed practice, and restoring Indigenous ways of knowing and being. And this training reflects that commitment. It's not just about recognizing or identifying harm. It's about finding paths to healing that are culturally and spiritually relevant to the people that we serve. Today, we're going to explore what ADHD is and how we can support our children and youth with ADHD. And at the end of today, you will hopefully have a better understanding of ADHD's symptoms, the causes, and some strategies. And you'll learn what it looks like in diagnosis to increase your ability to recognize if or when a child in your home needs further assessment or support, right? We'll also explore how trauma, displacement, and disconnection from culture can sometimes be misinterpreted as ADHD symptoms or exacerbate ADHD symptoms. And all this understanding can shift our approach from frustration to compassion, right? And if you believe you have a child in your home that may have ADHD, the first place to start is to discuss with their family doctor and then get a referral to a pediatrician or a psychologist. So our agenda today, we're going to review 3 key areas, okay? Identifying ADHD, so its definition, the causes and symptoms. We're going to look at impacts and comorbidities, so the broader effects and other conditions that might overlap. And then behavior strategies, so practical, trauma-informed, and culturally sensitive tools. So that's our agenda. And before we begin, let's center ourselves in the idea that, every child is doing the best that they can with the tools they have. And what we might sometimes want to call challenging behavior is often communication. And our job is to observe with curiosity, listen, and support, not fix. And today we'll keep that in mind as we discuss ADHD. ADHD gets discussed a lot today, and many people use it as describing a symptom they have, like, there's my ADHD again, when they can't focus or they've forgotten something. Some say it's entirely behavioral and a response to the food we eat, while others say it's now being overdiagnosed and medicated. So it's often talked about in extremes, either as a broken brain or a superpower. And by the end of this session, our hope is that you can look at a person with ADHD in a different light, with less extreme opinions. And my hope is that we can hold space for both the challenging and creative symptoms that come with ADHD and recognize the individuality of each person impacted by this disorder. Each individual has their own lived experience, and it's important as their caregiver to be curious about their behaviors, their actions or symptoms, and then find a way to communicate with them to determine, how you can support them. So what I want you to do, just as we're moving through this right now, think of one strength that you see in the child or children that you care for. Maybe it's creativity, humor, determination, or even their energy. I think this helps us remember that every child comes with gifts, not just challenges. All right. So, topic one, identifying ADHD. So, we're going to begin by looking at what is ADHD, what are the causes, and what do the symptoms look like. And ADHD is more than a child being hyper or forgetful. It's a neurodevelopmental condition, which means it's rooted in brain function and development. And the three key symptom areas are inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. Inattention can look like, not finishing tasks, maybe losing focus or forgetting instructions. Hyperactivity might show up as restlessness or needing to always be on the move. Impulsivity might look like blurting out answers, interrupting, or having difficulty waiting their turn. So the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, offers a definition, but we also recognize that many Indigenous children are navigating other layers. So we're also needing to ask, how much of what we see is ADHD and how much is trauma, how much is grief or cultural disconnection. We should always look at the whole child, right? Mind, body, spirit, and community. And it's important to remember that the DSM is a guideline and that each child or youth is an individual, and all aspects of their life and history need to be discussed with the professional during diagnosis. So it's the professional's job to ensure that the symptoms being displayed are not just from trauma and history. And this can be tricky as trauma, loss, and systemic issues can present with similar symptoms. And if a person has ADHD, the trauma they have experienced would, exacerbate their ADHD symptoms. And as caregivers, it's important to respond with compassion and awareness of these layers. So here, the DSM, it's an internationally accepted manual of the diagnosis and treatment of mental disorders. So it's important to note also that the symptoms presented must follow a specific criteria rather than being a general attitude or disposition of the youth. So symptoms must present in multiple settings. Symptoms should be present before the age 12. Symptoms should interfere or reduce daily functioning. And symptoms should not be better explained by another mental health condition. And ADHD actually impacts 1 in 20 children and is the third most common mental health disorder. Over half of these children will still have symptoms as adults. And while I think it's important to talk about a Western medical process, it's equally important to talk about Indigenous approaches. So for example, looking at guidance from elders, healing circles, smudging, ceremonies, and those land-based practices like drumming or fishing. I think the best approach combines both, Western tools and Indigenous cultural supports. So this way the child receives care that honors their identity as well as their needs. And as a caregiver, it will be your responsibility to include both approaches. And, I think potentially, I guess, some of the behaviors that we can see with people with ADHD, easily distracted, struggle with mental restless, disorganization, time management, and procrastination. They might have difficulty beginning and ending tasks, controlling behaviors and impulses. And they can find it hard to manage their emotions and be labeled as too sensitive or short-fused. ADHD is not just about having some challenges with finding attention and sitting still. It impacts personal, academic, relational, and work lives, leading to that chronic sense of underachievement and low self-esteem. And some other symptoms you might see is their inability to set and meet goals, especially around topics that they find confusing or they can't understand the purpose of, or it's just not important to them. They may have task initiation issues or challenges with completing tasks. So you might then see the extreme opposite to this in some areas where they, hyper focus on certain topics or goals and are unable to do anything but that. So this is all related to the delay and impact on executive functioning. And as a caregiver, this can be really confusing because I think it can appear that they have the skill to do certain things when they're hyper focusing, but then they can't, they're not able to do the small tasks like put dishes in the sink or remember to put socks on every day. It looks like a lack of motivation or not caring, when in reality it is a brain related function that needs support. The world, as it is today, can be challenging for people with ADHD to fit in to, right? It's important as caregivers to be able to support the child's symptoms and provide them with opportunities where they can use their strengths and focus on their passions. And this usually looks like changing the structure of the home and caregiver responses and support, advocating for accommodations in the school, or even finding an education system that supports their individuality and supporting them in focusing on what they're good at or interested in so that they can have those feelings of success and accomplishment that they may not get in the regular school system. ADHD, and this is important, ADHD does not impact intelligence. Once we can understand how the brain works with ADHD, we can support the kids and begin to see how truly amazing they are. And while we don't fully understand all the causes of ADHD, we do know it's not caused by parenting style or screen time. Okay, biological and prenatal factors are more influential. Still, we have to remain cautious of over pathologizing behavior and instead focus on what supports the child in their environment. ADHD, as I mentioned, is a neurodevelopmental condition, not the result of poor caregiving or a lack of discipline or over coddling. So let's, in topic 2 here, challenge some myths. So sugar, vaccine, or poor parenting does not cause ADHD. These beliefs are not only incorrect, but they're harmful. And often this places blame on families, right? And it's important that we base our strategies on science and compassion, not misinformation. Many times we find that these biases or opinions can harm families and their healthy functioning and place shame on the individual and the parents. So this is not productive or helpful at all. Symptoms of ADHD and how it appears in the behavior of a child. So let's take a deeper look at what ADHD looks like in daily life by each presentation, while remembering that there is a combined type presentation. So these symptoms can overlap, right? So we've got inattention, which would be like difficulty sustaining focus, easily distracted, forgetful, disorganized. And then moving into hyperactivity, so fidgeting, restlessness, that constant movement, being on the go, difficulty staying seated. And impulsivity, you might see someone that interrupts frequently, blurts out answers, has trouble waiting their turn, and acts without thinking. So these are some examples that we might see in our caregiver roles. We might see our kids or our youth getting overwhelmed easily when asked to complete what might seem like a real simple task, right? Asking them a question and getting I don't know, the majority of the time. You might see them being in people's personal space a lot, being stuck on video games, having a difficult time with transitions between tasks or activities, seeming to get more energy at nighttime, and potentially melting down after school, or maybe they're exhausted after school and need time to themselves. So these are some examples that you might see. So now that we know what the child's behaviors look like and what to look for, I want to talk about the why or cause behind the behaviors. So as you know from earlier, the prefrontal cortex is impacted due to a lack of neurodevelopment or developmental delay. The frontal lobe is not fully developed until the age of 26. This causes the child's executive functioning to be about 2/3 of their chronological age. For example, this means if a child is 8 years old, they may act 6 years old. If they are 15, they may act about 10 in their executive functioning. So this is such important information to know and will likely help make a lot of sense to some of the children in your care. So we can't expect a child with ADHD to have the ability to emotionally regulate at the age of 15 when their brain is not it's not there yet. Or we can't expect a child of 10 years old to be able to organize and get ready on their own without any prompts, for example. So once we know this, we can change our behavior and our expectations as parents and caregivers to support the child where they are at neurodevelopmentally. So this is huge, right? It has huge supportive impacts for the child. So they begin to feel seen, heard, and understood as an individual. They can feel less shame and pressure, and it decreases that ongoing sense of overwhelm. Let's take a moment to reflect on what compassion looks like in action. This video reframes ADHD not as a disorder to control, but as a child's inner world trying to be understood. It reiterates much of what we have covered so far. And as caregivers, this shift in perspective can help us stay connected rather than reactive. Think about this for a moment. When you hear cultivating compassion, what does that look like for you day to day? And think about that while you're watching this video, because that's what this video is about. This is what it looks like for me. So maybe take a breath before responding to challenging behavior. I might ask myself, what need is this behavior expressing, rather than, why are they acting out again? I think about building routines and accommodations that set a child up for success instead of expecting them to just try harder. So you're going to watch, it's just over 12 minutes. It's called Cultivating Compassion for the ADHD Child by Dr. Francine Conway. So please review the video and then we will move on.
When we hear a baby cry, we feel empathy for the baby and try to soothe the baby. But how would you feel if your school-aged child tells you he has lost his homework for the 5th time this week, somewhere in the black hole he calls his backpack? Well, would you feel empathy for this child? I'm sure you can all think of times when you felt empathic towards someone and times when you found it difficult to empathize. And I am no different. But being a parent of a child with Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, or ADD, ADHD, challenges my capacity for empathy. About 5 years ago, when my son was in middle school, I spent endless hours in homework battles, color-coding his binder, and writing across the folder, "Homework, turn in today," big, bold letters. And do you know, the homework would still come back home. then I would get frequent calls from teachers telling me to do something about his oppositional nature, and he's not working to his potential, code for lazy. This all left me frustrated. I was summoned to a meeting with 3 of his teachers, and they informed me that he was in danger of failing the 6th grade. After all of that, I felt defeated, humiliated, and mostly saddened. It was in that moment that I got what it must feel like for my son to have to face these teachers on a daily basis, given his struggles. That day, I cried. I cried for us both. Sitting through that inquisition, I felt my son, and me by extension, had been morally indicted. Well, what can I do? ADHD does not go away. I had to do something. I did not like the kind of parent I was becoming. So, being the researcher that I am, I began to review the literature and conduct research on ADHD, which has led me to this question. What if? What if we cultivated compassion for the ADHD child, shifting our stance from one of moral indictment to empathy? Well, let me share with you the world of the ADHD child. Imagine you're interacting with a child who does not follow the rules. In fact, this child seems to do the opposite of what you expect. It is a rare occurrence when this child finishes anything, homework, chores, even things that he expresses an interest in. And time? This child knows nothing about time. He is frequently late and does things at the last minute. No amount of cajoling, coaching, rewards, punishments, threats, bribery has worked in changing this child's behavior. And as a matter of fact, when any reasonable adult says to the child, "Do you realize you've just violated a rule or didn't do what you were supposed to do?" the child simply shrugs or stares at you like a deer in headlights. Well, I am sure if I took a poll of how you were feeling listening to this child, compassion would not be the word that comes to mind. You see, compassion is the feeling of empathy and the motivation to relieve the suffering of others. Most parents, teachers, relatives of ADHD people, we're motivated to relieve our own suffering. But how do you feel compassion for a misbehaving, hyperactive, inattentive, unapologetic child? The key to compassion lies in understanding the inner experiences of the child, which is simply this. Inherent in the condition of ADHD is an empathy deficit that interferes with the child's ability to take the perspective of others, which is a cognitive empathy deficit, or to share in the emotional experiences of others, which is an affective empathy deficit. Because of this deficit, the child I just described to you knows what the rules are. But when his impulsivity causes him to violate a rule, or his distractibility interferes with him completing a task, this child shows no remorse. He does not say, "I'm sorry." You see, the emotional connection between the child's behavior and the feelings it engenders in others is missing. This disconnect can be explained in part by neurological research that shows deficits in areas of the brain are also responsible for impulsivity, poor impulse control, and other ADHD-like behaviors. So it's not that the child is oppositional or antisocial, but when the area of the brain that needs to produce that empathic response is most needed, the child is unable to respond empathically. So I'm reminded of my work with a young child, about 10 years old. I'll call him Jeff. Jeff came into my office, and he was very upset that his friend would not play with him at recess. I said to Jeff, "It was only a few days ago you wanted nothing to do with your friend. Do you think he's still hurting over your fight?" Jeff's response was, "But I was nice to him today." You see, Jeff is having difficulty taking his friend's perspective. And psychodynamic research gives us some insight into why this is so. ADHD children do not understand or appreciate the nuances of interpersonal relationships. In fact, they fail to see people as complex as they are. Think of chocolate cake when you think of the ADHD child's experience of others. You may say, chocolate cake? Yes, chocolate cake. So imagine a vanilla, chocolate, layered cake with raspberry frosting, and it's covered with raspberry filling, and it's covered with chocolate frosting. For the ADHD child, they see a chocolate cake. The lack of empathy does not allow them to appreciate the layers in the cake and the nuances. It is empathy that gives us this appreciation for the complexity of other people and allows us to respond in an empathic way. I'd like to share one more story with you. This is a conversation I've had with a student. I'll call her Beth. Beth explained to me that when she was in middle school, that there were different teachers every period. Beth said she felt lost, she felt confused, there was a lot of movement. This continued into high school. Beth felt very depressed. She explained that she would say to herself at the beginning of the day, "I'm going to do better." But by the end of the day, she would fall behind. You see, Beth had very loving parents, and they understood that Beth was having difficulty, but they were frustrated with Beth and really couldn't give her what she wanted. Beth, like many children with ADHD, is caught in a cycle of strivings and frustrations, especially when they struggle to meet goals that most would consider attainable. I was inspired by my conversation with Beth, but she left the conversation very much aware of her failings and her struggles. Beth could not have empathy for herself. The ADHD child and us are caught in this vicious cycle where the child's behaviors fail to generate an empathic response, and our response reinforces their harsh, critical self-evaluation, making it very difficult for them to empathize with their situation. So I've just given you some insight into the world of the ADHD child. You see a child with all their strivings, frustrations, anxieties, who have difficulty taking the perspective of others or empathizing with themselves. With this in mind, imagine a world with no ADHD label. In this world, the focus will no longer be on changing the child's behavior, but on shaping the inner experiences of the child. Parents and teachers would have an opportunity to have a transformative relationship with the child as they navigate homework battles and hyperactive behaviors in class. And the child's behavior would no longer be a signal of their defiance, but much like a baby's cry signals a parent of its distress, The ADHD child's behavior signals us to their discomfort and their struggles. This world is not so far-fetched. It's a relational world that can be created, and it has the power to impact the biology of the mind and shape behavior. The power of empathic relationships are reflected in the words of Lao Tzu, a Chinese philosopher who says, "Being deeply loved by someone gives us courage, and loving someone deeply gives us strength." This is the practice of cultivating compassion. Thank you.
Research shows that the disorders listed on the screen can be common for someone with ADHD to have along with ADHD. So it also shows that, especially in girls, diagnosis of anxiety, depression, bipolar, and learning disabilities will be diagnosed before ADHD is recognized. And a single act of harm, like a pebble dropped into water, creates ripples that spread far beyond the point of impact. So too does colonization. It affects radiate across generations, shaping health, identity, and relationships to care. Impacts of colonization. Colonization has reshaped the systems in which Indigenous children grow, right? In schools, healthcare, and family supports. Many behaviors that we see as disruptive are actually protective responses to environments that have not been safe or validating. And ADHD interventions, they have to be rooted in healing, not compliance. And this is why it's important to support the individual child. We need to look at their whole history, their current behaviors and needs, and address or support them as they need. So when we look at treatment options for children with suspected or diagnosed ADHD, what you'll notice is that all strategies, except for medication, would benefit any child and caregiver who has experienced trauma and racism. Children with ADHD, may struggle socially, but that doesn't mean that they don't want connection. They may struggle with keeping their hands to themselves, and that's due to that impulsiveness. They may struggle with emotional regulation, so having tantrums, showing anger, having outbursts, black and white or legalistic thinking, which is that reconstitution of information, and not being able to keep up in a conversation or a group text or Snapchat. So that's their working memory. And then feeling overstimulated by large groups or lots of noise. All of these behaviors can be supported through putting them in social situations that they can manage and encouraging them to find the right friends who love them for who they are, right? And, I think about some strategies potentially, to promote this. Having small one-on-one play dates outside of school that are structured to keep children entertained, so there's less opportunity for impulsiveness or overstimulation. Maybe ensuring that the child is eaten, had something to eat, rested, they're rested and ready for interaction with peers. So let's make the play date short, allowing time for the child to be alone, have downtime or transition time between activities, and having a lot of conversations about social media, slang, sarcasm, and perhaps even practicing at home and supporting a youth with reaching out to peers in a way that feels good for them. Some youth will need help knowing what to say or how to get involved in the peer interaction. And it takes patience and understanding as a caregiver to pay attention to what situations are impacting a child and then giving them the individual support they need, right? So that they can feel successful socially. And we're not all made the same and don't have to conform to being social. with lots of friends who love group events. We have to really take an individual approach. You know, ADHD can affect learning, even though it's not a learning disability. The structure of many classrooms, with long periods of sitting, minimal movement, that rigid schedules can be hard for neurodivergent kids. So this might result in potentially lower grades, difficulty in traditional classroom settings, and like many other topics that we've talked about, have an impact on self-worth and self-esteem. So we can advocate for more inclusive and flexible learning environments. And it's important to understand what the child is struggling with to know what accommodations to ask for. And sometimes with children with ADHD, particularly with someone with the inattentive type, they will present as quiet, well-behaved, who does not require any supports. And if you aren't exactly sure what the support need is, I think a counselor or a resource teacher could be beneficial. I think lean on the team to help you navigate all of this. So this slide shows us, how ADHD can impact learning. Let's think about or talk about for a moment what could some of the accommodations be around that. So I think about frequent breaks, maybe, break tasks down to bite-sized pieces. Present them visually to the child, because sometimes verbal processing doesn't work. So, it's important to sort of help them visualize it. Have a consistent daily routine, having visual clocks or timers, have a quiet space for them to go do work. Maybe there's access to noise canceling headphones, having fidget toys at their desk, maybe a wobbly chair. That would be awesome if there was an exercise bike in the classroom. I could see that being really beneficial and a great accommodation. And getting the child to be the class helper so that they get to move around. So these are some of the accommodations that I think about that might really help with success in the classroom. We're not dealing with a child who won't behave, but one who can't, at least not yet, and not without some support. Many strategies focus on external behaviors, but we also have to look at the child's internal world. So emotional regulation, self-worth, and nervous system safety. Those are all key. And remember that some behaviors might overlap with trauma responses, anxiety, like shutdowns or mistrust. ADHD strategies help, but connecting first with safety and relationship is really key. And I think our goal as a caregiver is to raise children in settings that are safe, supportive, and allow them to flourish. What you might have already noticed if you've spent time with a child with ADHD is that after they have done something, whether they've hit somebody, they've stolen something, they've yelled, acted out, or even not saying anything when asked, they'll feel bad and either regret it or think they are bad, and then they internalize it. So this shows that they know how they want to behave, but it's a struggle for them to do that. And this is due to that impulsive nature of their brain and living in the moment. And it's very challenging for them in the moment to see those future consequences. So then you add in the emotional dysregulation, and you can begin to understand just how hard it must be for them. Research shows that exercise is one of the top treatments for ADHD. 30 minutes a day can improve executive functioning performances, and that's from Dr. Russell Barkley, and we're going to talk about him in a few minutes. Exercise stimulates the neurotransmitters and chemicals in the brain. It helps with feeling calm and relaxed and allows the internal motor of ADHD to be satisfied. Structured routines allow a child to feel calm and safe, and then they know what to expect each day and to be able to prepare for what's to come. A change in routine can spark overwhelm and increase behavior challenges. A structured routine should also be limited with activities. So having too much to do increases that sense of overwhelm. I also think modifying caregiver behavior changes that childhood behavior. So when caregivers understand the disorder and what's causing the symptoms, this leads to compassion and forgiveness for the child's behaviors. All right, so next you're gonna watch this video. It's just over 3.5 minutes. It's called "This is What It's Really Like to Have ADHD." And I think this video helps us step into the lived experience of someone with ADHD. And it reminds us that neurodivergent children or youth are navigating a world not built for their minds. And then remembering that empathy is the first intervention. So please go ahead and watch this video, and then we will be back and carry on.
I asked people with ADHD one question. What do you want the world to know about your ADHD?
This is what I want you to know about my ADHD. It takes me a lot of hard work to get my work turned in on time. I'm very smart, but my grades drop sometimes.
If I could actually sit down and start my homework, I would. But many days I just can't, and struggling with something so seemingly simple tends to make me feel very frustrated or even stupid.
I'd like the world to know that there are people like me out there who get good grades, rarely get in trouble, and yet can and do have ADHD and struggle with the symptoms that come along with it.
Just because you can't see it doesn't mean that it isn't there.
My ADHD affects every aspect of my life, from sleep to school to work, all of my relationships, and I have to tailor my entire life around having it.
It doesn't always look the same. I was only diagnosed at 25 because I have the inattentive type.
I'm basically hyperactive. I was diagnosed at the age of 7.
I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD until I was 38, so I always thought you need to be hyperactive to have it.
I've filmed this video too many times now, and I can't get it right, and it's really stressing me out now.
I try really hard, and it hurts when people act like I'm not trying as hard as I am.
But the worst part is when my symptoms aren't taken as symptoms, they're taken as behaviors, done intentionally to upset someone or consider that I don't care, and that's never been the case.
Whenever you think that I intentionally tried to hurt you, I didn't. I probably just screwed up.
I'm at least as frustrated as you, and probably even more.
When I say I forgot, I'm not lazy, I'm not just trying to make an excuse. It's a real struggle, and I'm probably even more pissed off at myself than you are at me.
There is a giant flipping war going on inside this head. I really am trying.
When I use my accommodations, it's not me trying to take the easy way out. All I'm trying to do is level the playing field so that you and I have a lot more even chance of success.
When you see me arranging my pens and pencils according to color, it's because my brain is trying to compensate for the chaos within.
I squeeze some Play-Doh in my hand and let me concentrate on what I'm doing.
I moved to a special spot in the classroom for tests because I can't block out noises and distractions like you can.
While I'm staring off into space, it doesn't mean I'm stupid.
It doesn't mean that I'm not listening to you.
Normally it means that you've triggered a really interesting thought which my impulsive brain can't help but chase.
Having ADHD is like having a billion trampolines in your head, each representing a thought, and your brain just jumping off each and every one every second.
I don't think about ADHD as a disorder. I take it as more of a different way of thinking.
I know my brain works differently, but ADHD can give me an advantage with what I'm doing.
It may take me a while to come to a solution. It tends to be really different than everybody else's, and a lot of people appreciate that.
I've been told my whole life I need to be fighting my brain. I'm learning now that I need to love and work with my brain.
It's not an excuse, it's an explanation, and it's something that I'm going to continue working on for the rest of my life, and that's okay.
I'm smart, but ADHD makes focusing hard and hides my abilities. If I'm given the chance, I can achieve more.
To meet this amazing community and learn more about how to support them, please visit howtoadhd.com/howtohelp. Please share.
Also, sticky notes. Yay!
Topic 3. So this is our final topic, and we're now going to begin to look more in depth at treatment and management of ADHD. Only qualified professionals can diagnose and prescribe medical treatment. So that said, you are an expert on your child's needs and context. And caregivers play a key role in observing what works, what doesn't, and advocating for wraparound care. So we have discussed a lot of strategies today that can support a child or youth with ADHD. Any information presented today should not serve as a substitute for medical advice. If you have any concerns about a child, please consult a medical professional. Okay, that's really important. Dr. Russell Barclay reminds us that children with ADHD, they need a multi-layered approach. And as caregivers, here's what that looks like in daily life. So counseling and support. For a foster child, counseling isn't just about ADHD skills. It's also a safe space to work through trauma, grief, and identity. And as caregivers, we can advocate for access to culturally safe counselors. And that might include reaching out to the First Nations Health Authority or the Indigenous Child and Family Service Agency for some referrals. Compassion and forgiveness. So this is where caregiving becomes both challenging and powerful. So children with ADHD, we know they're going to forget instructions, they're going to lose focus, or make the same mistake 10 times in a row. And compassion means that we pause and remember. This is not deliberate defiance. It's part of their condition. And forgiveness means giving them another chance without holding grudges. And for Indigenous children in care, compassion also means understanding the bigger picture. You know, that they may be carrying the weight of separation from family, community, and culture. Medication. Now, Barclay stresses that medication is one of the most effective treatments for ADHD. And for caregivers, this means working with doctors and other members of the care team to ensure medication is used appropriately and that it's monitored. But remember, medication is only part of the picture. For Indigenous children, it is also vital to pair, medical treatment with cultural grounding. For example, spending time on the land, hearing traditional stories, or being guided by elders. And this creates balance between, Western medicine and Indigenous healing. And then modification and accommodations. So as caregivers, we can make changes that set kids up for success. So maybe using visual schedules, breaking tasks into steps, and allowing movement breaks. At school, it means advocating for IEPs, so the individual education plan, or advocating for extra support. And for Indigenous children, accommodations should also include that cultural connection, right? Making sure that they can attend ceremonies, learn their language, and see their culture represented in their learning environment. And the Child, Family, and Community Services Act requires cultural continuity for Indigenous children in care, and we as caregivers have a role in ensuring that happens. Barclay's framework is powerful, but when we adapt it for Indigenous children in care, it becomes even stronger. Counseling should be culturally safe. Compassion should include an understanding of historical trauma. Medication should be balanced with cultural healing, and accommodations should include cultural identity as a core need, not as an add-on. All right, let's talk about medication for a moment. So, medication can be helpful for some, but it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's also vital to make sure you inform medical professionals about any other substances or treatments, as these can interact in unexpected ways. As these medications have such a short life, they need to be taken daily as they only work for the day that they're taken. They're not the same as an SSRI. So an antidepressant, for example, they don't work where you need to taper them off. If the side effects outweigh the benefit, the medication can just be stopped and a different one can be tried. But please, please always discuss this with the family doctor. It's really important. And research shows that long-term use of medication creates neuroplasticity in the brain, and this is from Dr. Russell Barkley. This means that it creates brain growth in the prefrontal cortex, decreasing the developmental delay. So this is pretty cool when looking at treatment of ADHD. And there's two types of medications. There's stimulants and non-stimulants. So stimulants stimulate the neurotransmitters in the brain that are delayed in ADHD to support them in connecting or firing properly. Essentially, they're stimulating them to work. And then the non-stimulants are used for people who can't tolerate stimulants or who have other conditions where taking a stimulant would not be beneficial. And, therapy isn't just to use when a crisis hits. It can be proactive. And, therapy, especially with caregiver involvement, helps build routines, positive reinforcement, and emotional literacy. And a therapist can also help untangle ADHD from trauma responses or environmental stress. So some examples of therapeutic techniques are, and we've talked a little bit about this, creating a routine, helping with organization, and maybe maintaining a clear and consistent use of language, understanding how their brain works, emotional regulation techniques, mindfulness, and cognitive behavioral therapy. So it's important to find a therapist that has training in supporting children and caregivers with ADHD. Today we've discussed many strategies, treatment or management ideas, and Thrive is a model that helps you visually see some strategies that will support a child and the home a child with ADHD lives in. So Thrive is just one model, but what's more important is its spirit, right? So structure and empathy. We also want to challenge the idea that success means productivity. Thriving means feeling safe, connected, and valued. It's not just about finishing homework. So this is a model you might also like to spend some time looking at in your own time. And in our efforts to decolonize our work as caregivers, it's important to always come back to the individual and recenter culture and belonging as ways to create healthy and thriving households. ADHD isn't specifically a modern problem or disorder. The human brain has always worked in a variety of ways. And the first mention of ADHD is documented in the 1700s. So it's through the understanding of cultural differences, of wraparound support and empathy for the whole child, we can begin to unframe our more problematized views of ADHD. And when we look at the characteristics or strengths of those with ADHD, we can find that they are creative. They have the ability to see the world from a different lens. They can hyper-focus and specialize in topics or trades. They can have the ability to feel deeply and care about those around them. They can have intense energy, exceptional problem-solving skills, strong intuition, and the ability to thrive under pressure. So these traits, while often seen as challenges, can actually become advantageous when harnessed, empowering individuals with ADHD to excel at various aspects of their life, such as sports, creative fields, and even crisis situations. The circle of courage. Yes. So the circle of courage invites us to move beyond behavior management and into holistic relationship building. And when these four needs, belonging, mastery, independence, and generosity are met, children thrive. And this model also reminds us that challenges with focus, regulation, or energy aren't moral failings. Instead of asking, how do I fix this behavior? We can ask, well, which part of this circle might be missing or disrupted right now? And as caregivers, we can ask ourselves, how can we ensure that each of these parts of the circle are supported for each individual child? And the circle of courage allows us to take an individual look at each child, harness their strengths, and allow them to share those strengths with others, which in turn, gives them a sense of mastery, belonging, and independence. So, this video highlights Indigenous approaches to learning and growth rooted in land, story, and relationship. So these principles, they offer powerful alternatives to Western models of discipline, and let's honor them. So we'll watch and listen to Dr. Martin Brokenleg.
Reclaiming Youth at Risk was an attempt to show the world some of the wisdom that comes out of Aboriginal culture and life, and in particular how it is that Aboriginal people raise strong children. See, we know that your mind has to be educated if you're going to live well in Canadian society. It's a complex society. It's a complex culture. And you really need to have an education to live well in this society. If you don't have grade 12, the quality of your life is going to be diminished. If you don't have that education, not only your own life, but the lives of your children and your grandchildren are negatively impacted if a person leaves school before completing grade 12. So you have to have an educated mind. But what our ancestors were particularly skilled at was teaching a person's heart. Now, we don't even have a good word for that. Some societies have talked about the cultures, some societies have talked about the virtues. At UBC, we always use the term formation to talk about the learning that can occur on the inside of a person, the learning that can occur in the human heart, because it doesn't work the same way as learning in the mind. I can teach somebody's mind by just talking to them. That's enough to get an idea in a person's head. But I get something into your heart only if I give you certain experiences. See, we know from about a century of research that there are 4 kinds of experiences that create a strong human being. Number 1, if you know that you are significant. Let's see, I see you every day, and I say to you every time I see you, you're very important to me. Well, after 10 years of doing that, I've talked to your mind. So how do I get it down into your heart? By how I treat you. How I treat you will place that learning into your heart. So every human being needs to know these 4 things: that I am significant, that I am capable, that I'm powerful on the inside, and that I'm a genuinely good human being. My co-authors and I took these 4 human needs and we looked to see how our ancestors raised children to experience that, and we put it around a medicine wheel. Because our discovery was that our ancestors knew that belonging lets you know how important you are. Mastery is how you experience what you know, what you're capable of. Independence, in the sense of being responsible for yourself, that kind of power on the inside is how I will know that I'm a strong human being. And fourthly, if I live a life of generosity, that's how I will know my goodness. And I will need to restore that sense of goodness if I ever go through a crisis of some kind. So let's think briefly about these 4. Belonging is probably the most necessary human experience. It's in every child. If I had a mom sitting on the chair here and a baby's crawling on the floor, the baby looks up and sees unfamiliar faces, where's that baby going to go? Crawl right over to mom, right? How do you teach this to a baby? Do you put arrows on the floor? Do you give them learning objectives with pre-tests? No, it's in them. They come that way. Every baby in the world knows that it's important to belong. Every teenager in the world wants to be with friends, and that's normal for all teenagers. And so we want to think about this theme of belonging as a strategy. First of all, it's a philosophy. It's a way to look at the world. Everything belongs somewhere. Every human being should belong to someone. We should train ourselves to respond with belonging and write it into every policy that we have. Belonging should be a theme. Lots of schools imagine they are very belonging places, but when a teenager is in crisis, how do they respond? Unbelonging. But they don't call it unbelonging. They give it other kinds of names like time out, they will say. Zero tolerance, they will say. Out of school suspension. It's the wrong response. What you want to do when a person is in crisis is surround them with special connections. We want to train ourselves to respond with belonging. That has to become a part of our philosophy. We have to find technique ways that we can embody this, because we want people to learn this by experience if they're going to be strong. See, the circle of courage philosophy is how you turn someone's intergenerational trauma in a positive direction. You change a person's biological legacy in a positive direction if you provide lots of belonging experiences and experiences of mastery. It's in every human being to want to succeed. The parent of a 3-year-old will tell you every argument you have with a 3-year-old is whether or not you're going to let her do it herself. The parent of a 16-year-old will tell you every dispute you have with that 16-year-old is whether or not you're going to let him do it himself. And when you come to visit me when I'm living in the nursing home, listen to what I say to the staff, because pretty often it's going to be, let me do it myself. Every human being has a desire to succeed, yet we can break it. Mastery isn't getting something done. Mastery is discovering what you can do, because that's naturally in every single human being. So if we want people to have these qualities down the left column, we have to make sure that they discover what they can do. It has to become a philosophy, but it also has to be a source of techniques as well. Independence we're using in the sense of responsibility, being responsible for yourself. And the best strategy that adults have here is using discipline appropriately. My task is to teach my children how they don't need me, how to be so empowered that they don't need me any longer. And that's what discipline does. If, as a parent, I take the role of being a coach and a cheerleader, that's the perfect kind of parenting that we can give. Real discipline gives you a person who makes a decision because it's right, not because anybody's watching. And they're very different kinds of dynamics. Our real job as adults is to empower young people so they don't need us anymore. If you look back at the traditional ways of your people, you will discover that gradually and appropriately we empowered our young people until they became people who contributed to our communities and who took their rightful role as adults and did all the right kinds of things. Our system was not a system of control. It was a system of empowerment. And that's typical of Aboriginal childcare. If we want people to have the qualities down the left column, we have to give them opportunities for generosity. This is why on the coast, people have a tradition of potlatch. We use them to mark any turning point in our life. And our custom is we invite everybody we know, we feed them, and enough food isn't enough. There has to be too much food. There has to be so much food that everyone carries some home. That's when you have enough food. And then we deliberately accumulate all the goods we can so we can give them away. So everyone takes something home as a memento of this event, and we'll remember this event. They were witnesses to this event then. You're supposed to give away until you don't have anything left. And actually, it's only when you get to that point that you can turn your life in a positive direction. Real generosity hurts. Real generosity has to cost. My point in this circle of courage is to say this is a resiliency code. If you want to be a strong human being, you have to have these 4 kinds of experiences over and over again. See, we can't guarantee that your life is going to be free of problems, because nobody's life is free of problems. Everybody has problems. But if you have resiliency, which is what you get out of these experiences, the resilient people, when life knocks them down, get up one more time. And if you look into the face of a child, you will see in the heart of that child everything that we can be. And we can become that if we use these themes of belonging and mastery and independence and generosity. Thank you for inviting me.
let's recap our journey together here. So today we explored ADHD, what it is, what it isn't, and how symptoms of inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity show up in children and youth. We looked at treatment and support from both Western and Indigenous lenses. So counseling, compassion, we talked about medication, modifications or accommodations, and the importance of cultural connection. And we talked about practical tools caregivers can use, like structure, routines, positive reinforcement, cultural grounding. And I want to thank you for the incredible work you do every day. Supporting children with ADHD takes patience, consistency, and a big heart. And the responsibility of maintaining cultural connection makes your role even more vital. And you are part of their healing journey. So let's end with this. ADHD is not a failure of parenting or character. Learning, empathy, growth, and community are our tools. And when we understand the whole child, we're already doing the work. So thank you for taking the time to view the webinar, and I hope it's been helpful, and I hope that there's been some learning along the way. All right, take care.